Hi, Sandites. Welcome to Sandite Chat. This is episode 6, but the first one we've had this year. So hopefully you enjoy this episode. I want to introduce our guest today. I think they're new to podcast. So we have Carrie Schleyhuber, our Assistant Superintendent for Special Education and Enrollment. And then Terry Lee, our principal at Limestone, not Fine Arts Academy, Limestone Technology Center. I knew the answer to that before So welcome aboard. I think you're new to a podcast as well. So I'm really excited to have these two ladies sitting next to me and to talk about specifically this topic of attendance. And so just want to kind of get through the why behind and why it's kind of become a big topic recently. So kind of a parent need to know is that our attendance policy changed this year. Really, we are replicating standards that are required by our State Department of Education. None of this is really new in terms of how we have to document attendance. What is new is that we have a policy that really mimics in practice what we've been doing. So I'm going to just kind of go to you, Carrie, and if you could talk about our new policy, talk about the changes. And I know there was kind of a visible change with parents in terms of unexcused versus excused absences. But really, the reflection to the state is not changed from last year. So you mind expanding on that?
Sure. So in conversation with principals, one of the big things that we've really noticed recently is just an increase in student absences. One of the things that the state really looks at is chronic absenteeism. And for a student to be chronically absent, that means that they're missing 10% or more of the school days. And so in Sand Springs, with 175 days, if you miss more than 17 and a half, you're considered chronically absent. And so
not by our standard.
No,
that's not
by
a
the
district.
state. Yes, by the state. And that is, many parents probably don't know that's tied to our A through F report card that we do get from the state. And it's an expectation that we're monitoring that.
Right.
And so in conversations with principals over the last year, we've really felt like we needed to clarify some things on the policy. For example, our old policy had disciplinary measures that included things like out-of-school suspension. So it didn't really make a lot of sense to suspend a student for not coming to school.
Right.
You didn't come to school.
So
we're going to have you stay home longer. Yes, right. And so instead, we created a policy where the elementary principals, elementary kind of goes one direction and secondary goes a different direction.
Right.
Really just based on secondary, obviously you're trying to get credit. You're getting course credit for graduation. And so we really looked at how many days absent in a semester or in a school year are going to really impact a student's ability to learn. And so we set parameters that just, at day number 6, you're just going to get that first reminder from us.
Right.
It's not a slap on the wrist. It's not anything, punitive. It's just, hey, we don't even know if you realize it or not, but your kiddos missed 6 days already.
Right, true.
And so you can find the policy on our website, and it really lays out all the different levels of, how many days you can miss before we start to see it as being a chronic problem.
I think it helps to talk about the why. Obviously, it's not about being judgmental toward families. It's not about not understanding there are legitimate reasons for a child to be gone. Obviously, if a child is really sick, we don't want them to be at school. But I think we need to talk about a little bit, dig a little bit deeper into the instructional loss when a child's absent. So I'd shift to Terry for just a minute regarding the learning process. And students whom are learning very critical skills, i.e. literacy in reading and math, lost instruction is a big deal. And so maybe describe how that affects, in early years, the lack of consistently coming to school.
Correct. And I love that you use the word consistent. It boils down to we can't teach your babies if they're not at school.
Right.
We can't teach them. We have set curriculum that follows the standards, and it's very systematic. It's continuous. It's building on different skills every day. So when students miss a week, they just are drowning by the time they come back. And parents, I think they think that they can get them caught up by, well, just give me the worksheet or the textbook and I'll make sure they do their work whenever we have time. But they're missing their teacher's instruction, which again is direct, systematic, consistent. They know what they're doing. So when they're missing that instruction, of course, we don't want to talk about test scores, but it affects everything. Their test scores,
Absolutely.
just really their daily work. For example, a big writing project. They've missed the day when you're brainstorming and taking it little by little. Let's just put some thoughts on paper. And then the next day we're going to do a rough draft and then we're going to edit. They're missing all those steps so that then they're on their own trying to make a final product.
Right. I love that you mentioned building blocks. Mm-hmm. And I try really hard to tell our teachers that they're the professionals. They've been instructed and gone to school to understand how to deliver instruction. That's super important. And it's important across the board into high school, but particularly when you miss a component that's a building block to the next level, then systematically you have a gap in what you're learning. And to build on it, we see that, I think, a lot of times, specifically in mathematics, when you hit middle school, if you've missed some of those standards that you don't have mastery, then by the time you get to middle school, where you might be getting into algebraic equations and talking about unknowns or letters that represent numbers, if you don't have those foundational skills, it's really hard to think abstractly, especially really in anything, but math comes to mind when I think about that. The other thing I would mention too is I think the transfer law in regard to denials goes hand in hand with attendance in regard to how important it is that kids come. So maybe reflect, Carrie, a little bit about what that means. What am I talking about when I say transfer denials? Because we don't accept transfers for everyone that applies to come to our district.
Sure. Sand Springs, we are really, quite frankly, we're reliant on transfers. We take 700 or 800 transfers a year, which I think I'm very impressed with us for that. I think that it shows that we're committed to all students and students are wanting to come to Sand Springs. But when a principal is looking at your documentation from your last school, if you have 10 or more absences in a semester, that's going to be a red flag to them. If you couldn't make it to school in your neighborhood school, in your district,
right,
how are you going to make it to school when you're going to be having to get yourself to Sand Springs from another city?
Absolutely.
And so our principals don't like to deny transfers. They want to take everybody, but they really have to look into that. Again, because the best place for you to be is going to be where you can get yourself to school. If you're in your own community, you can get on a bus, and that, that's not an option if you're a transfer student. But also, we just recognize, like Ms. Lee just said, if you have that many gaps from the year before, we're going to be doing a lot of catch up with you for the next year if you can't get to school when you need to.
One of the things that we rely on in terms of identifying students for intervention, and then this thing called response to intervention, which this isn't the podcast for that, but really is that element of determining which students need some extra help in layman's terms. And so one of the things we look at in special ed in terms of identification for a student with a disability is, did they have lack of instruction? And Terry, I know just from a standpoint of being at school as a principal, it's pretty easy to spy a child that really doesn't have that. And so I guess my question is, what kind of behaviors do you see in a kid who maybe doesn't have that consistency in attendance and coming to school every day?
Right. So you have your academic behaviors. You also have social behaviors that they're trying to adjust to rules and procedures, and they've missed out on that. Or friendships that are developing. They haven't been around enough to develop friendships. So I'm glad you brought up the intervention process and the lack of instruction, because we're actually, now that we're finished with benchmarking, we're sitting down with our intervention teams and discussing that. And it really is hard to determine, okay, does this baby need extra support, or is it just because they haven't been at school to learn?
Right.
Regardless if it's academic or social.
So you could erroneously identify a student as needing additional intervention or instruction as a student who's struggling because of different reasons, when really it's because I haven't been at school.
Right.
And I think that's the maybe key component we need parents to understand is our goal is to make sure kids can function academically, socially, emotionally, and all of those other things that go hand in hand to what we call a good education. I know social media is kind of our friend and kind of not our friend sometimes. We try really hard to get communication out to folks to make sure they understand. I do think I always say we could do a better job of making sure people understand. And I do think there are sometimes misconceptions that parents have about how they perceive and how we perceive absences. And I think sometimes we see that in the comments. Carrie, is there anything that you'd like to clarify in terms of misperceptions maybe parents have about absenteeism?
Sure. I've got a couple of things that I would love to talk about there. The first thing is traditionally we've always used the terms excused versus unexcused, and that has really muddied the water, quite honestly, because you might be able to get a doctor's note 37 times that we would in the past have said, hey, that's an excused absence, when the truth is maybe that's not really what the child was out for or not exactly what was going on in that time. And so what we've done to really try to make things a lot simpler for both parents and for our site attendance clerks, we've just taken away the excused versus unexcused designation. And we're just saying if a parent calls in, that absence is verified. And if we don't hear from a parent, it's unverified. And the reason that we're changing those terms is because the state doesn't really recognize an excused absence versus an unexcused absence. What the state will tell us is an absence is an absence is an absence. And so we're trying to build on that same language so that parents understand. And for example, we know students are going to get sick. We know that perhaps you'll have a death in the family. We know that there are extenuating circumstances, and we're not looking to be punitive when your child has to miss on those days.
Absolutely.
And that's why there really are several built in. There's a cushion there. We're not calling, we're not turning you into somebody when you miss one day of school. We're talking about very frequent and very consistent absences as opposed to being in attendance. And then the second thing that I really want to make sure that I make clear to people is this is not meant to be punitive or a gotcha. In fact, when a student is having difficulty coming to school, we have a variety of supports in place that we want to utilize to help. So I would say if there's a parent that's listening to this today, if you're struggling with that, reach out to your school counselor. Our counselors are so trained and equipped to really help in those situations. That was a little feedback that I had seen a couple of times on the social media posts is, this is a systemic problem and nobody is going to help it get better just by punishing. And so I just want to make sure people know this isn't about punishing. We want to walk alongside you if you're struggling to get your kiddo to school, and we want to be able to either be the resource for that or put you in touch with somebody that would be the resource for that.
We've been really blessed about additional resources we're able to offer this year. I'm pretty excited about it through linking to partnerships that we've forged over the years and accessing extra grant-funded dollars, competitive grant-funded dollars sometimes that allow us to provide services that aren't readily available at maybe other districts. I think you touched on a key component, and that is family engagement. You use the word verified versus unverified. In my mind, I'm thinking that is great because we have verified absences, meaning a parent has called and said, hey, my child's not coming to school today because. Terry, address a little bit about the parent connection. I think it's really important that we start talking about a team of support around a student that includes everyone.
Absolutely.
So describe what a good connection with a family engagement would look like. What do you hope for?
Well, parents and staff members, we're teammates, right? Our goal is to educate your child, your
Absolutely.
baby. In regards to unverified and verified, I just want to touch base with you. Like, I'm not judging you if your child's out with a temperature, but if I don't hear from you after 4 or 5 days, I start worrying about that child. I need eyes on him. I just need to know where he's at. So again, it's just teamwork. We want to educate your child, but you have to bring him here for us to take care of him.
Absolutely. And parent-teacher conferences are coming up really quickly, too, in October. And so that's a time, I don't want to say that's the only time parents can engage with their teacher or students' support group at school, if you will. You should be in connection anytime you have a concern, but certainly make sure your parent-teacher conferences that are coming up pretty quick. I'd like to delve in, even though it's not completely about attendance, Carrie, but just the level of services. I'm thinking Daybreak. I'm thinking of the new counselor at school. I'm thinking of our school resource officers that we have expanded over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. Can you dig into the resources that we do have available for parents and kids?
Sure. We're really excited about the partnership that we have with Daybreak at FCS this year. They are really able to dive in and provide wraparound services for families. So in years past, it may just be that they were able to serve some students at school. And now because of that expanded program, they're serving families outside of the school day as well. They also have a broader net that they can cast to serve students and families in different ways. We've got still have the case managers and the counselors who are housed in our buildings, sure. But we now also have youth care coordinators who would be a great resource for families to reach out to if they are struggling with some attendance issues. The grant funded position that you brought up, we were able to onboard a counselor for our their title is drug-free school coordinator. And like you said, that doesn't necessarily go with attendance, but we do know sometimes if there is an instance of substance use, maybe by the child, maybe in the home, maybe by an extended family member, there could be a situation where we need to reach out to that person to also be a resource to the family. And again, not in judgment, but because we are teammates, it's a partnership.
Exactly.
We want to all, the end goal is for that student to make their way all the way through to graduation and beyond in Sand Springs. And so those are two key elements, I think, Daybreak at FCS and then the drug-free school coordinator. I know at each site, they also really have somebody that's kind of designated as the person who's making those phone calls, reaching out to parents, getting more information about attendance. And I think it just takes a parent being bold and willing to say, we need some help. And then I feel like what they're going to see is that team's just going to jump right in and try to help them.
And there's no shame.
No.
It means some help.
No.
Goodness knows we all need help occasionally. I think it's pertinent to say our schools have 3 resource officers that are in connection. They are really our Sand Springs Police Department officers. But they're at the school located at Clyde Boyd, Charles Page Academy, and then do roam the elementaries as well. I think people get it in their head that that's for kids that are quote unquote naughty. It's not. I mean, their goal is to make relationships with students. And so any kind of resource we can put out there, we're going to try to do. I don't know that you know this, but we have a staff member on our floor that just got information today that we're going to be able to, I think, hire 2 family coordinators, elementary and secondary. So I'm really excited about that. It's actually an additional resource, and we're not ready yet, but that we're getting ready to implement on top of what you're saying.
And that's so exciting.
I just think our goal is to make sure our kids are successful.
And I think, Ms. Durkee, what parents may not realize just because they don't have the opportunity to be in the school every day is that so many of our support staff are also those people that notice when students are missing.
Absolutely.
I think about like our cafeteria workers. Sometimes they are the staff member that kiddos connect with.
Absolutely.
Or a custodian or a paraprofessional or, just that extra person that maybe in a parent's mind, they're not thinking like, them being the teacher, but for whatever reason, they've made an impact and they've made a connection with a student. And I know before I was housed over here, I was at Charles Page High School, and the cafeteria ladies, the cafeteria workers there, I mean, they knew every kid by name.
Absolutely.
They knew when you weren't there. They asked why you weren't there because they cared about you.
Yes, and they offer a scholarship each year to
Yes.
a graduating senior, which is great. I was at a meeting with our bus drivers, and one of them mentioned, we know we're the first faces that some of these kids see every day. And so it's super important that we remember that we function as a team. And I sure don't want parents to forget that at all. Golly, is there anything else that you guys can think of that I've forgotten to say? Last message to parents. Miss Lee, you have anything that you'd like to...
I just want to touch on the teachers for just a second, too. I feel like we didn't really approach that. They're super dedicated, and sometimes they're overly dedicated. And so when these kids are missing a lot of school and they're trying to help students catch up or reteach a lesson, many times it's their lunch break. And I'm always like, please go take your lunch break. Well, I can't. This one needs, a week of being caught up. And so I just want to give a shout out to the teachers who it's harder on them to go back and reteach the lesson again, or they've already graded this assignment and now they need to go back and regrade it. So students that are absent a lot, it doesn't just affect the student, it's also the teachers.
Yeah. Every student, every day. And I think they do believe that. At planning time, after school, before school, I see it all the time. And it is true.
They just give it up.
Absolutely. You have a heart for it, and you're here for a purpose. And I think that's what they illustrate every day. Carrie, last minute,
I think for me, I would just say to parents, if you have a question, please reach out. I've talked to several parents already this school year that really needed clarification or needed a little more understanding. And I feel like we both walked away from the conversation, having a little bit more understanding of why we're doing what we're doing. And then me also explaining to them, like, you are the parent, and you do have the right, if your child's going to miss a day of school, then absolutely you can do that. And so mine would just be reach out, and if you are a parent that loves to share social media, share our posts when you see our Every Student Every Day the Sandite Way. When you see those posts, share them. And if you're listening to the podcast and you get in conversations with people that maybe aren't seeing it the same way we do, be willing to share it and have a conversation about why we're doing it.
I'm going to give you a plug, man. That was your brain, whatever. I mean, you just came up with it, and then we all reluctantly participated.
I told her it was not an activity. It was labeled an activity on our agenda. It was not.
No, and all of a sudden we're on the Facebook page.
I thought you guys were great movie stars, and I think that we should, probably do another commercial just with principals. No, I don't need to be on it.
There you go. Golly, that includes this podcast, you guys. I hope you gleaned something for it. I think the best piece of advice is, if you have a question, if you have a concern, reach out to one of us, your teachers, the team, those folks that really care about your kids. So I will see you next time.